Next time, who knows if that's what's going to happen? Iran could send a much bigger strike. Now that Iran has set a new precedent and sort of opened Pandora's box by attacking Israeli territory from Iranian territory, no matter how harsh President Erdogan's rhetoric is, as long as Turkey wants to help bring about a ceasefire and then a lasting political settlement afterward.
However, Washington's support for YPG continues.
I personally believe that the YPG is a terrorist organization. It is the PKK. FETÖ has done a great job in cultivating members of Congress and even state legislatures and bringing them on trips to Turkey and feeding them a diet. Funding them and funding them too, yeah. NATO has to decide, do we want to have a nuclear war, potentially, with Russia over some small bit of territory in whatever, eastern Latvia? It's a very risky thing that Armenia's leadership is doing right now, saying we want to be with Europe, we don't want to be with Russia. Well, we don't want a country that has a territorial dispute with Russia becoming a member of NATO, because that could bring NATO into conflict with Russia. But Germany itself had a territorial dispute with Russia when it became a NATO member. It was called East Germany, which was occupied by Russian.
Merhabalar efendim. Harici'de yine bir özel röportajla, önemli bir röportajla karşınızdayız. Malum Orta Doğu yine sıcak. İran'ın İsrail'e misilleme saldırısından sonra İsrail'den ne yanıt gelecek? Büyük bir merakla bekliyoruz. Fakat saldırı olursa nasıl olacak? İsrail'in İran'a misillemesi nasıl olacak? Herkes bunu çok merak ediyor. En çok konuşulan başlıklar arasında kapıda mı sorusu var. Bu konuyu konuşmak üzere önemli bir konuğumuz stüdyoda ağırlıyoruz. Beşiktaş'ta Harici ofisinde Orta Asya'da görevlerde bulunmuş, Güney Kafkasya'yı çok iyi bilen, enerji konuları ve Orta Doğu'yu, özellikle Türkiye'nin içinde bulunduğu süreçleri yakından takip eden, Beyaz Saray ve ABD Dışişleri Bakanlığı'nın geçmişteki önemli diplomatlarından, danışmanlarından biri, emekli Büyükelçi Matthew Bryza bizimle birlikte. Efendim hoş geldiniz.
Hoş bulduk.
Nasılsınız?
Çok iyiyim. Biraz yorgunum bugün ama iyiyim.
So let's continue our conversation in English. Thank you very much for expressing some words in Turkish. So it was very kind of you.
My pleasure.
So let's start talking about the recent regional developments between Israel and Iran. The main question is now how Israel is going to answer Iran's retaliation act. What is your take on this? What should we expect?
Yeah, right now, as we sit here, there's a debate going on in the so-called war cabinet in Jerusalem about that very question. It seems a foregone conclusion that Israel will respond. It feels it must respond in some way so that it demonstrates to Iran that there's a cost, a price to be paid. And you can't just send over 300 projectiles toward Israel and not suffer any cost. So I think that Netanyahu is not going to pay attention to President Biden's advice, which is to, as Biden said, take the win. You suffered a humiliating blow to Iran by knocking out of the sky over 99% of what was sent toward Israel. Take the win and move on and celebrate Passover and quiet things down. No, I think across the political spectrum in Israel, all Israelis, even on the left, want Israel to respond. But neither Netanyahu, I think, nor the vast majority of the members of his cabinet want a regional war. They don't want a war with Iran. So I think they'll look for a way to respond maybe against Iranian military installations, not targeting the personnel, but maybe the infrastructure. They could launch a cyber attack. They've done it in the past. But I think it will be some sort of limited physical response, most likely, that from Israel's perspective reduces the risk of a regional war or an all-out war between Israel and Iran.
Do you expect any assassination? Because this is actually a tradition of Israel when coming to assassinate Iranian, sometimes politicians, sometimes academicians who are working on nuclear.
Yeah, they did do that with the nuclear scientists, although, of course, Israel denies it. I have no idea what they're actually thinking about, but I would be surprised at this point if they return to using assassinations as a tactic, because I think now that Iran has set a new precedent and sort of opened Pandora's box by attacking Israeli territory from Iranian territory, I think on the Israeli side, there has to be a calculation about, frankly, how much bigger might the Iranian response be this time? Iran sent one wave of attack. Oh, granted, it was in 3 different components. There were drones, and there were cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, but the targeting was limited. And it doesn't seem that the Iranians targeted civilian infrastructure, and the Iranians gave plenty of warning so that Israel's friends and allies could be ready to help Israel shoot down the incoming missiles. Next time, who knows if that's what's going to happen? Iran could send a much bigger strike and could do it without any warning and could really inflict damage then on the civilian population of Israel. So I think the Israeli leadership is considering that and doesn't want to do anything that would push Iran over the threshold to really go after Israel's population. So I would be surprised if assassinations were part of the response.
So what do you expect as Israel's response?
Well, as I was saying, I think they could launch limited missile strikes on Iranian military infrastructure, could be on the infrastructure that was used to attack Israel, and they could launch a cyber attack, as they reputedly have done in the past, yeah.
And why do you think really they postponed this response?
Well, I think they're debating at the top level of the government and the war cabinet. It's now been publicized that the most moderate member of the so-called war cabinet, Benny Gantz, initially wanted Israel to strike back right away against Iran and in a forceful physical way. And it was reportedly Netanyahu, the prime minister, who said, no, let's discuss this, let's debate and figure out, again, how we can send a strong signal to deter Iran, but without causing a wider war. So I think that they've just been trying to figure out what to do, or trying to agree on what to do, and maybe B, Passover is coming.
So yes, Turkey actually was tracking these recent developments very closely. Nobody was on screen talking about what Iran should do or what Israel should do. After the incident, we heard that Ministry of Foreign Affairs was actually lobbying between two countries not to increase the tension. But recently we heard President Erdogan saying Hamas is, this has nothing to do with Iran's retaliation, but it's putting a position actually. He also said the thing doesn't started with Iran targeting Israeli soil. What happened in Damascus, Israel targeted as a diplomatic mission belonging to Iran, Islamic Republic of Iran. So, actually international community didn't raise its voice enough to condemn this violation of Vienna Conventions. This is one of the first points of President Erdogan, and followed by Hamas. He was resembling Hamas to national forces of Turkey, which was fighting against the invasion of Turkish land, against the invaders. And he said that I know, while saying this, I know that I will pay a price for this. So how do you think President Erdogan's definition of Israel and Netanyahu administration as bloodthirsty and blaming them as the main responsible for the anxiety provoking tension on the night of April 13, and how do you evaluate these statements? And besides your comment about Turkey putting trade restrictions on Israel.
Okay, Sirhan, there's a lot of pieces there. We might want to unpack them step by step. First of all,
a lot of pieces, but all, they're integrated to one another.
So my understanding is that Washington did ask Minister Fidan and Turkey's foreign ministry to deliver message to Tehran before it launched the missile strike, asking Iran not to respond in a dramatic way. And in fact, the Turkish government publicly said similar things. And so I think Washington now has turned a new page in relations with Ankara and is working together more with Ankara on difficult issues in the Middle East, where, frankly, Turkey's expertise is so deep, and in many cases deeper than that of the United States. It's nothing new for President Erdogan to speak positively about Hamas. He's done that since I was working way back when in the White House, 2001 to 2004. And then when I was back at the State Department between 2006, 2009, he continuously spoke positively about Hamas as a liberation movement.
So this is not something which is going to impact relations between Turkey and the U.S.?
No, and I'm making the argument quite the opposite. The relationship is improving between Turkey and the United States now. So Washington expects President Erdogan to make those sorts of statements, doesn't like them, but I think they respect President Erdogan's right to have whatever view he has. It's been my view for a while that President Erdogan would like Turkey to be able to play not only a mediation role, but maybe even be a guarantor of whatever political settlement comes out of this horrible war at some point, who knows when. If you go back to the early weeks after the October 7th Hamas attack on Israelis, Hamas even said that Turkey and President Erdogan had played an important role in the freeing of some hostages from Thailand. So clearly there's a useful role that Turkey can play, and I think Washington is starting to appreciate that. So no matter how harsh President Erdogan's rhetoric is, as long as Turkey wants to help bring about a ceasefire and then a lasting political settlement afterward, I think Washington will value that.
You said that the relations are improving already. We have solved F-16 crisis, so that's number one thing for Turkey. While Pentagon officials frequently emphasize the importance of Turkey for NATO. One of the crises now, as I said, between two countries has been resolved. However, Washington's support for YPG continues. And that's one of the main problems, which is going to stay at the top of the agenda for Ankara. Still, messages are being given that bilateral relations have entered a new phase, but nothing is changing regarding this terror issue.
Yeah.
I mean, the U.S. doesn't consider YPG as PKK Syrian branch, as Ankara does. How does Washington position Ankara in the tension in the Middle East, given that YPG is one of the problems actually in the Middle East, which is in Syria and directly producing problem for Turkey, let's say, in the border?
Yeah. Well, one person's terrorist group is another person's liberation group. As you mentioned before, President Erdogan calls Hamas a liberation force, but it clearly committed terrorist atrocities against so many Israelis. So it has committed terrorist acts. I personally believe that the YPG is a terrorist organization. It is the PKK. It just happens to be in Syria. And so the United States has been violating its own policy of not working with one terrorist group against another one in a very disingenuous way. And I know for a fact that when the United States was first deciding in the Obama period to work with the YPG, they totally disingenuously decided to rename it, right? The Syrian Democratic Forces, knowing the YPG is a terrorist organization. So that was an instance of really bad faith. So why did that happen? The reason that happened is twofold. One is that the United States didn't have anyone else willing to go on the ground and fight ISIS rather than US soldiers. And frankly, if YPG or PKK terrorists or soldiers, whatever they want to call them, are willing to fight and die rather than American soldiers, that's a good deal from Washington's perspective. The other problem, though, is the ignorance in Washington about Turkey in general. As great and big and powerful a country as this one is, as Turkey is, it's not known very well in the United States. And it's the realm of specialists, basically, rather than general experts on foreign affairs. General experts on foreign affairs, they all have an opinion about Russia, China, Middle East, but not many know anything about Turkey. So the debate has been manipulated in the United States against Turkey, often by various diasporas present in Washington, and they've persuaded the foreign policy elites, not inside the State Department or White House, but in think tanks and journalism, that Turkey is targeting not a terrorist organization in terms of the YPG, but all Syrian Kurds. It's crazy how very educated, smart people have been manipulated, and they don't differentiate between YPG and the peaceful Kurdish population in Syria. So that problem's going to fester for a while, but what is true is that both capitals have decided to improve relations. The F-16 issue, we should keep in mind, it wasn't sort of a crisis that came up on its own. It was an attempt by the United States to offer a way to de-escalate the dispute, which was a political crisis, between Ankara and Washington over Turkey's purchase of S-400s from Russia, the air defense system, and then the US's kicking out Turkey of the F-35 fighter program. So the idea was, okay, let's find something that Turkey already has, a very capable weapon system, F-16s, and help Turkey procure more of those, and then use the money that it already spent on the F-35 program to buy something else it needs. And so that was a de-escalatory step by the United States.
Actually, this wasn't among my questions, but you said that maybe the diplomats and the bureaucrats in the US do not know enough about Turkey. Mm-hmm. Maybe they do not know what is true, what is false in the region. Yes?
And intellectuals and journalists.
And journalists, okay. And what should Turkey do about that? Because Turkey is not just a Middle Eastern country, you know, and it's not Syria, it's not, I don't know, Egypt, whatever. But the thing is, Turkey and the US are allies in NATO. Mm-hmm. How comes this image or the true information, correct information, we're not being able to imposed among your intellectuals and diplomats and state workers, let's say? What is the reason for that? And as a policy recommendation, as finding you as a former diplomat, I would like to ask you, what would you recommend to Turkey to come up with that?
Well, I mean, why is there not a high level of expertise on Turkey in elite circles of foreign policy, intellectual circles? They've been focusing on other countries. You know, I mean, it's as important as Turkey seems to us, it doesn't seem that way in Washington sometimes. And part of the reason why that's the case is what I mentioned before about diaspora organizations who manipulate, feed distorted information into the debate. And that problem grew worse in recent years, especially, remember back in 2020 in the summer.
You're mainly referring to Armenian diaspora and
Greek American
members.
FETÖ, Armenian American diaspora, and Greek American.
Diaspora.
Yeah. And really FETÖ has done a great job in cultivating members of Congress and even state legislatures and bringing them on trips to Turkey and feeding them a diet. Funding them and funding them too, Yeah, so the debate got distorted, and then as I was saying, when you go back to the summer of 2020 when there was such great tension in the Eastern Mediterranean, understandably Ankara said, enough is enough, nobody's listening to us, we're just going to flex our muscles in the Eastern Mediterranean and exercise our rights. And then these organizations, and then France, in particular President Macron, used that Turkish exercising of the country's rights to say, see, Turkey is provocative, it's ignoring international law, it's violating international law. And then that created a firestorm of misunderstanding. To President Erdogan's credit, after Angela Merkel intervened in July or August of 2020, Ankara de-escalated in the Eastern Mediterranean. It pulled out as you remember, its oil and gas exploration ships, and they haven't come back to the Eastern Mediterranean. And then since then, Turkey has launched a diplomatic campaign to improve relations with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE, as we all know about, and is playing a constructive role in Azerbaijan with membership in the Peacekeeping Observation Center, together with Russian forces, which are withdrawing now, by the way, the Russian forces. And so what Turkey needs to do, I think, is what it's doing. Be active and constructive and avoid putting itself in a position where Turkey's, let's say, I don't want to say enemies, but foes want to take advantage and manipulate the story to say, see, this proves that Turkey is aggressive and untrustworthy. So be constructive as Turkey is doing now.
This is your policy recommendation.
And in all those areas I mentioned, yeah, keep it up.
Yes, so going back to Erdogan's statements regarding Hamas, he said that I am telling all this, but I know that I'm going to pay a price. What do you think the price he's talking about he's referring to the reactions of the U.S. or what?
I don't know. I don't know what was in his mind then, but I don't think he has to worry about any reactions from the United States. I mean, the Biden administration is putting a lot of pressure on Netanyahu to stop murdering civilians in Gaza. So strategically, I think at the moment, Turkey and the U.S. are on the same general page, even if President Erdogan's rhetoric is very harsh against Israel or supportive of Hamas. So I don't think he'll pay any price. He may, I don't know what he's thinking. Maybe he's worried he's going to get criticized by the media in Western countries, but he doesn't really care about that, I think.
Yeah, previously I asked you a couple of questions in the same sentence, in the same paragraph. Mm-hmm. Maybe you skipped it. Did you comment about Turkey's trade restrictions on Israel?
No. So if we think back to the Mavi Marmara incident back in, I guess it was June of 2010, that led to a real breakdown in relations between Turkey and Israel. But in the decade that followed, the level of trade between the two countries increased by over 200%, more than doubled. So even though the diplomatic and political relations were terrible, the trade continued. And in fact, Israel imports much of its crude oil from Ceyhan via the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline. So there's a vital continuing economic link between Turkey and Israel. And so I think private business and state companies in Turkey wanted to keep on profiting from trade with Israel. But now I guess it's gotten to a point where the government here felt too much pressure from the opposition and internally, and even from the MHP, for example, to be harder on Israel and not to allow for business as usual, meaning letting the trade just continue as it always had been. So now, I mean, already before Turkey imposed the prohibition on, I think, 54 categories of products to Israel, already since Israel's attacks on Gaza, trade had decreased by like 21.5%, so already going down. Now the difference is private companies will not be able to export certain products to Israel. I don't think that's going to be that consequential for the Israeli economy, because I don't have in my head what all the products are, but there's jet fuel, there are other sources of that, there's marble, some other manufactured goods. Turkey wasn't a huge trading partner for Israel, and vice versa. Israel's a small trading partner for Turkey, but politically it's a significant gesture by Turkey.
Okay, so I've got a few questions on NATO. NATO plans to build a 10,000 strong base in Romania and a 5,000 strong base in Bulgaria. What are the risks of an increased alliance presence in the Black Sea? How do you see Turkey's role in this?
I look at it the opposite way. I think without that sort of U.S. and NATO military presence in the Black Sea, the security of Turkey and all the Black Sea countries and all of us will be much lower because of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. If Russia is able to continue and quote-unquote win, which means it's able to hang on to Crimea, it's able to hang on to Donbass, and move beyond that to attack Odessa, it will keep going. It will go on to Moldova. It will move back in a bigger way into Georgia, and I'm convinced it will move into one of the Baltic states. I used to run a think tank in Tallinn, Estonia, and after Russia's previous invasion of Ukraine in 2014, we were very focused on how Russia might do something similar in a NATO member state as it did in Crimea and Donbass, which is say, we're not invading. We're just, there's some little green men that are occupying some administrative centers. It's not the Russian military, until Putin admitted it was the Russian military. So if he was able to do that in, let's say, eastern Estonia, he could take NATO territory under control, deny that Russia is doing it, and then later say, yes, it is we who are there, and then NATO has to decide, do we want to have a nuclear war, potentially, with Russia over some small bit of territory in whatever, eastern Latvia. Mm-hmm. And in that case, NATO's Article 5, the collective security pledge, is dead. And so then that will have a huge impact for all of NATO, including Turkey. If Russia attacks and captures Odessa, the economy of Ukraine will be devastated, and if it goes on to Moldova, the security risks in this part of the world will be huge. So the presence of U.S. military forces in Romania and Bulgaria will send a powerful deterrent to Russia saying, if you keep going, we will come after you.
Yeah, talking about Ukraine, the war fatigue has set in other Western countries. Is it time for negotiations, do you think, or should we expect a new escalation of the war?
Well, Putin clearly doesn't want a real negotiation. He wants to keep up the war, and Zelensky doesn't feel politically ready for it either. He feels that it's not what the Ukrainians want. So the parties have to decide whether or not they want to negotiate.
Do you think Zelensky is really deciding by himself?
Yes, I do. Of course he is.
You
He's democratically elected. Who's controlling him?
I don't mean he's controlling, but most of the time we observe that he's directed by the US, actually.
No, that's ridiculous. That's Russian propaganda.
No, that's not Russian propaganda. I mean, what I'm asking is, as long as the West is going to finance Ukraine, the war will continue, right?
And as long as Russia continues to make its entire economy focused on invading a country and occupying it, the war will continue. Russia's violating international law. Stop the invasion. It had no reason to invade Ukraine. There's no reason at all. So if it stops the invasion, then everything will be fine. So no, the United States, as you said, is not controlling Zelensky. It's not urging him to go forward. It's trying to respond to the Ukrainian people's request and demands that the United States provides assistance so that they can fight and not be exterminated, which is what Putin has said he wants to do. He said he wants to exterminate Ukraine as a country. And we see the war crimes that Russia has committed already, abducting children. Putin's indicted for war crimes, right? So abducting children, the horrible atrocities in the beginning of the war north of Kiev, in Bucha and elsewhere. So I don't know why anyone would expect that if Ukraine just said, okay, we stop fighting, Russia would say, oh, good, we want peace. They will keep going.
Do you really think that this is a frozen war now, or do you expect an escalation?
I expect that Russia will continue escalating and that Ukraine, once it gets, I think it will get this assistance, it will then be able to stop the Russian escalation and will increase its attacks on Russian military targets.
Okay, let's also talk about Russia and Turkey relations, mainly on energy. Russia says that it may carry out joint studies from time to time to make Turkey as an energy hub for Europe. He stated this several times, Russian President Vladimir Putin, especially considering the energy bottleneck that Europe faced after the Ukrainian war. Wouldn't Turkey becoming an energy distribution center benefit the Western conflict? It
would. That's long been a goal of U.S. foreign policy. I worked on it beginning back in 1998 to help Turkey diversify its supplies.
This is your main expertise.
Good question. It helped Turkey diversify away from its dependence on Russia. By the way, it was deep corruption in Turkey, in the government then, that allowed the Blue Stream pipeline to happen. That pipeline agreement, Russia to Turkey, it was approved by a former minister of state without informing the foreign ministry of Turkey or the general staff because of corruption. And I know for a fact, I know the people involved, they were getting paid huge amounts under the table by Russia to create this pipeline that perpetuated Turkey's dependence on Russian gas. Same thing is happening now. So for Turkey, from my perspective, it would be great if it really was an energy transit and an energy trading hub whereby it was receiving natural gas from multiple directions, from Azerbaijan, yes, from Iran, liquid natural gas from anywhere, from the United States, from Qatar, from Nigeria, from Algeria, and of course some Russian gas. And I think that's President Erdogan's vision. That's not Putin's vision. Putin's vision is to make Turkey a hub or a transit route for Russian natural gas. I'm on the board of the biggest private natural gas distribution company in Bulgaria. So I watch Bulgarian politics very closely. And right now there is a huge political scandal in Bulgaria because the secret agreement was leaked, whereby the Bulgarian government, together with the government here, agreed that TurkStream would be a way for Russia to expand its natural gas imports to Hungary and to Serbia, looking ahead to when the EU has said it's going to stop taking natural gas from Russia in 2027. And so Turkey has to decide, where does it want to be on this debate? Does it want to be facilitating Russia through these secret and often corrupt agreements for bigger pipeline capacity? Or does it really want to be a trading hub where everybody gets to compete and not in a way that undermines the European Union's own decisions on not taking more Russian gas. That's a tough decision. It's not for me to say. That's Turkey's decision.
You're talking about so many things which might be undisclosed for some other people. Can you give any more details on that?
Yeah, you can just, I could send you articles and right now about the debate happening in Bulgaria. So just, you can go online and look at the Bulgarian news services, or there was just a major public hearing about the agreement between BOTAŞ on one side and then Bulgargas and Bulgartransgas, so all state-owned monopolies, which does what? Which monopolizes the interconnection of natural gas pipelines between Bulgaria, or between Turkey and Bulgaria, and doesn't allow any private sector competition to get into the movement of gas essentially from Turkey into the EU. For Turkey, for BOTAŞ, that's good because it's good business for BOTAŞ. It is a state monopoly. For Russia, it's essential. It's a way Russia is going to have a back door to keep bringing natural gas into the EU after 2027, because private companies like the one I work with, we want to bring in non-Russian natural gas. We want to have competitive trading, or even there could be some Russian natural gas, but there needs to be non-monopolistic use of all of this infrastructure. So you could look that up. There was a public hearing 2 weeks ago on this in Bulgaria by think tanks and by journalists. But the debate is raging right now in Bulgarian politics. There's a brand new caretaker government, and there's a big argument over these arrangements right now.
Okay, so actually our time is up, but I have one more question.
Sure.
Because you were the ambassador to Azerbaijan, you lived in Baku.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about South Caucasus and the tensions there. While the Armenian administration expands its relations with the EU and the USA, and at the same time Azerbaijan continues to be a good partner for Europe, especially in the field of energy, as we're speaking now. Considering Russia and Iran as factors, what is Washington's basic plan in South Caucasus? Where does Turkey stand in resolving Azerbaijan-Armenian conflict?
Yeah, I was also the U.S. mediator between Azerbaijan and Armenia in the Karabakh conflict and oversaw our relations with the region for a long, long time. I think, number one, what Washington wants is peace, a peace treaty between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and has publicly, repeatedly said, we're happy as Washington to play the role of a mediator or facilitator. We don't have to. What matters to us is that somebody's playing that role. Charles Michel, of course, the European Council president, has done a great job of that. And so the desire of the U.S. is the peace treaty between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and then agreement to define their international border, which they've never done since the Soviet Union collapsed. At the same time, as you said, Esra, the United States and EU are responding to Prime Minister Pashinyan and his foreign minister Mirzoyan's statements recently that, number one, Armenia doesn't want to be in Russia's military alliance anymore, the Collective Security Treaty Organization. It, I think, incorrectly believes that the Russian peacekeepers on the ground in Azerbaijan were obligated to come to Armenia's defense during the Second Karabakh War in 2020, and then last September when Azerbaijan finally regained all of its territory that had been occupied by Armenia. I actually don't think Russian peacekeepers had any obligation to get involved. Nonetheless, politically, it's become the point that Pashinyan is saying, we want to leave the Russian military alliance. Armenia is going to join the International Criminal Court, which obligates it to arrest Vladimir Putin if he's ever on the territory of Armenia. And Pashinyan and the foreign minister of Armenia have said, we want to join the European Union. If you remember back to the Maidan in Ukraine in 2014, it was Ukraine's desire to join the European Union, or at least to sign an association agreement that kicked off all of this craziness, 2 wars and 2 Russian invasions. So it's a very risky thing that Armenia's leadership is doing right now, saying we want to be with Europe, we don't want to be with Russia. A lot of people in Armenia hate that. Russia hates that. And so Russia responded in the last couple of days by saying, we're going to remove our peacekeepers from Azerbaijan. Armenia, now you're on your own. So Armenia's leadership is making a strategic choice to be with, quote unquote, the West. Azerbaijan's leadership is more careful. It's been the leader, it was the leader for 4 or 5 years of the non-aligned movement. It does not aspire to join any or align with any bloc, neither with Russia, nor with Iran, nor with the West. And so I understand why in Azerbaijan people are upset that the US and the EU are now saying, okay, Armenia, you can come our way. But Azerbaijan has decided to stay on its own. So it's actually, Azerbaijan is getting what it wants. It's being respected as a good partner of the European Union, as you said, respected as an independent, non-aligned country. And as long as it has a peace treaty with Armenia, and Armenia can't threaten Azerbaijan militarily, and as long as Armenia finally implements its pledges to open up all the transport corridors linking Armenia with Azerbaijan and Armenia with Turkey, Azerbaijan should be happy. And I think it will be once there's a peace treaty and once there's a border agreement defining the border between the two countries.
One of the main things are now is Zengezur corridor.
Yeah, it's one of the corridors. Yeah, and it needs to happen. I think it will. I think
you believe it's going to happen because
yeah.
Armenia, besides Iran, I mean, they're just resisting this not to happen.
Yeah, well, Pashinyan is not resisting it, but his political opponents are, and he's opposed by the so-called Karabakh clan, former leaders from Karabakh. As well as nationalists and the Dashnak Situn, so-called Armenian Revolutionary Front, who want conflict with Azerbaijan. They benefit personally, either through money or political support, as long as the conflict with Azerbaijan is unresolved. Some of them want to recreate the medieval state of Greater Armenia, which means taking territory from eastern Turkey, from Azerbaijan, from Iran. I think that's crazy. But some of them really want to do that. And some of them, again, are just opportunistic and they get money from emotional members of the diasporas, whether it be in Russia or France or the United States, who think, yes, we need to resurrect that great old medieval homeland of Armenia. Clearly, those revanchist forces in Armenia are not gone. They're still there, but they're weaker and weaker with every day.
Okay, we're up at the last question
sure.
about Georgia. So do you think the EU is opening doors to Georgia? Mm-hmm. Because now they were given the candidacy status as being membership. I mean, I talked to Toivo Klar, actually. He's the special representative for Georgia
for the South Caucasus in general.
South Caucasus and crisis in Georgia, actually, this is the title. But he says that this is not really going to happen in the near future. So but what is your take? I mean, Georgia is also in between, between being a post-Soviet country and a European country.
Mm-hmm. So, Georgia was a vibrant democracy before 2012. And it clearly had chosen the Western path. It wanted to be a member of NATO, it wanted to be a member of the European Union. And the population, overwhelmingly, over 85% of the population of Georgia still wants those two things. But its current government does not want those things. Its current government wants to have strong relations with Russia. It's therefore canceled some big infrastructure projects that would have helped Georgia integrate with Europe, whether it be the Anaklia port in western Georgia or the Caucasus Online internet service provider privatization. Both projects would have helped Georgia, again, connect its economy in many different ways with that of the European Union. And so when a year or so ago, when Ukraine and Moldova were offered EU candidacy status, Georgia was not. And that's because of deep dysfunctionality in Georgia's political system. And then the Georgian government made some pledges to enact some reforms, and then the European Union said, okay, now you can be a candidate. But now, the main issue that the Georgian government agreed to accept, which was not to have, or not to move forward Russia's style of agent registration rule, is back on the political agenda. So now the Georgian government has said, we promised the EU we wouldn't do this. We're going to do it anyway. We're going to push forward this Foreign Agents Registration Act. So the European spokespersons have now come out, even Charles Michel in recent days, saying Georgia can't possibly be on a European path if it's going to take steps like this. So I think it's derailed again, the Georgian aspirations, which the population overwhelmingly wants to join the European Union, is derailed for now, and there's a political stalemate in Georgia.
So as far as I guess, now Georgia is going to be going through the process where Turkey is going through in the past 4 decades.
What do you mean?
Just pending.
Pending. Yeah, but it's different. I mean, I think there are a lot of European leaders who don't think Turkey should ever be a member of the European Union because of their anti-Turkic feeling. I mean, it was Giscard d'Estaing, former leader of France, who said famously in late 70s, early 80s, he said the European Union is a Judeo-Christian organization.
Yes, it's a Christian club.
Christian club, yeah. Georgia doesn't have that problem, right? And Georgia is much less known. I think there is strong general support for Georgia to become closer to the European Union, within the European Union, I mean. What's more controversial is Georgia's membership in NATO, with Germany having historically been opposed to that because Germany is afraid of Russia.
Okay.
And Germany is such a double standard. They say, well, we don't want a country that has a territorial dispute with Russia becoming a member of NATO because that could bring NATO into conflict with Russia. But Germany itself had a territorial dispute with Russia when it became a NATO member. It was called East Germany, which was occupied by Russian military forces. So
that's bizarre.
It is bizarre.
Yeah, okay. Ambassador Matthew Bryzel, thank you very much for joining my program. It was a great talk. It was really insightful. I'm sure our audience will have some ideas which they agree and disagree. So
good for them.
Çok teşekkürler izlediğiniz için. Çok keyifli bir sohbet oldu. Emekli Büyükelçi Matthew Bryzel ile konuştuk. Kafkaslardan Orta Doğu'ya, İsrail-İran meselesinden Türkiye-ABD ilişkilerine pek çok başlığı ele almaya çalıştık. Çok teşekkürler izlediğiniz için. Hoşça kalın.